Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this talk. My name is Imran Nazarali, and I am a user researcher at DXW. And today I'll be talking about a project called A Breath of Fresh Air that we worked on with Southwark Council in July of this year. But before I get started, if you'd like to ask any questions throughout this talk, please feel free to write out your questions in the comments section. So at DXW, we're a leading employee-owned digital agency that works with public and third sector organizations to improve their products and services and ultimately improve people's lives. We have worked with the NHS, the Department of Education, Mind, and of course, Southwark Council, along with many more. So A Breath of Fresh Air was a 7-week discovery project with Southwark Council that was aimed at understanding how we can mitigate the exposure of air pollution for residents and priority communities within the borough. Southwark Council had partnered with Impact on Urban Health, part of Guy's and St Thomas's Charity, who are a local place-based urban health foundation, to co-fund this piece of work. And this is because in March of 2020, Impact on Urban Health kicked off a 10-year program to understand how people's health is affected by poor air quality in urban areas and to explore the solutions to addressing air pollution. So we had all the support behind us to really make the most out of this project. However, we also weren't doing this alone. We were working in partnership on this project with a company called Rooted by Design. Now, Rooted by Design are a social design house that centers the experiences and needs of Black communities to create services and solutions to shape a more equitable future. Black communities are living with the impact of systems and services that were not designed to meet their needs. Their outcomes across health, education, employment, and criminal justice have suffered as a consequence. Rooted make real change by finding new ways to design more and design differently with Black communities, shifting inequalities which keep them from thriving. And we were incredibly excited to work with Rooted by Design, as you would imagine. And this was mainly because of their equity-centered design approach, which could and should be applied to a project like this. And it was something that we at DXW were really keen about learning, especially in practice. And so before I get into the journey we took, I wanted to share what exactly an equity-centered approach is about. So design and equity as individual practices bring a bit of trickiness with them. Design can often fail to address the root cause of inequity and exacerbate inequitable power relationships. And equity work can often lack an intentional and powerful approach to design and creativity. So an equity-centered design approach comes from combining the design thinking methodology and the equitable practices mindset together to form an equity-centered design approach that can really design with purpose, consideration, and empowerment for the people it's supposed to help. And so this is how it looks as a process. It's all about discovering and understanding people's scenario through understanding their history. It's about leading with empathy and taking the time to build relationships as human beings together and not as researcher and user rather. From there, you can begin to define what is important by assessing and defining the community needs that have arose from the relationships built and interactions that have informed you of a community's or individual's lived experience. And then you can begin to invite diverse co-creations from the community through different engagement methodologies. Now, what is one of the most important things, though, is ensuring that the community is kept aware and involved in the project so that the power stays in their hands. And that's where things can potentially go south very quickly and where decisions can be made for people rather than from and with them. And so now I will talk a little bit about the project itself and give some background and context that will set the scene for the journey that we went through. Essentially, poor air quality is a pervasive problem, particularly in highly urbanized and densely populated areas in Southwark. And poor air quality has adverse health impacts on people, including exacerbating existing lung conditions. And these adverse effects impact communities very differently, which can exacerbate existing health inequalities. And this project was also extremely important for Southwark to address because of the really unfortunate and unnecessary death of Ella Kissy Deborah in February of 2013, which was caused by acute respiratory failure. And it was found out actually that air pollution where she lived in Southwark made a significant contribution towards her death. So Southwark currently help their residents mitigate their exposure to poor air quality by offering a service called AirText, which is an air quality forecasting and alert service that sends a text message or email to subscribers when the forecasted pollution levels are higher than usual. Now, this air quality data is derived from Cambridge Environmental Research Consultants, or CERC for short, and their world-leading advanced distribution management system, urban air quality model, which is actually quite amazing. Their ADMS urban air quality model is distinctive in its ability to describe in detail where pollution exists on a range of scales, from the street scale to the city-wide scale, taking into account the whole range of relevant emission sources. So traffic, industrial, commercial, domestic, and other less defined sources. However, as awesome as AirText has the potential to be, there is a huge inclusive design problem that it's challenged with. It has minimal reach in Southwark and does not seem to be used by key groups exposed to the health effects of air pollution. As of March of 2019, only 318 Southwark residents were subscribed to receive alerts. In contrast, 18,000 residents have had a respiratory condition in the borough, and almost 35,000 have hypertension. It also doesn't seem to reach ethnic minority communities, with 82% of respondents on the survey were from people with a white British background. Highly polluted spaces around the borough tend to be occupied by non-white communities, and some of the highest polluted spaces, for example, are the Old Kent Road and around Peckham. And over 60% of the Old Kent Road residents and over 70% of Peckham residents are from non-white ethnic groups. And so this was the project brief, and I shall read it out now. How might we support target communities to change their behavior to mitigate the impact of air pollution on their health? This was the original brief set out by Southwark for this project, and there are a few key components to this. So the first is target communities who Southwark were actually really clear on. They were people who lived north of the borough and consisted of people who were non-white, Black, Asian, and other minority groups. Other people in target communities were priority groups who were considered older adults, those who have respiratory issues, and lastly, children and other young people who have a much less mature respiratory system that can make them much more vulnerable to air pollution. And so the other part of this project was centered around behavior change. It wasn't focused on how we can reduce air pollution, rather how we can help people take preventative action to mitigate their exposure to air pollution. And so there were some tensions around this kind of behavior change model that we explored through the work, which speaks to power and the idea of controlling and influencing people's behavior, which threw up a lot of ethical questions around our equity-centered design approach. However, I will talk about how we address this a bit later on. So, while the brief was clearly centered around AirText as a service, and it could have easily gone down the route of focusing solely on improving AirText as a service, both Rooted and us wanted to take a much more open and exploratory approach to this discovery. And we were really happy that Southwark were very open and willing to let us explore the problem as a whole and enable us to get to the root cause. And this was really valuable as it would require a much more in-depth exploration to tackle this complex problem that already has a lot of systemic inequality historically. And so now we'll take you through our journey in a bit more detail. So the approach that we took coming into this as a partnership was essentially to align on a process and kind of split up into two, with Rooted focusing specifically on the Black community and us at DXW focusing on the non-Black communities. So myself and Aisha, who was the researcher from Rooted, agreed on the research questions and themes that we wanted to explore and ensure that when we're designing our research sessions and conducting our research separately, that we weren't going to be diverging to the point where our analysis would be completely different and not align later down the road, because this would cause a lot of problems trying to synthesize our research outcomes, and they would be completely different, which would make it really difficult for us to kind of turn into next stage actions and would kind of leave Southwark in a bit of a sticky place. So before us at DXW went any further, we wanted to do a bit of desk research and understand ourselves a bit about the existing research that is out there on the impact of air pollution. We also wanted to know why and where and why, there is an inequality in respiratory health. But most of all, we wanted to know a bit more about who these other non-Black members of the community were. The best we had to run with before going into Southwark was that they were mixed and multiple ethnic groups, Asian and Asian British communities. Now, I personally face this challenge all of the time in not being able to clearly share my ethnicity when filling out forms or surveys or wherever else I need to share this information. The clearest that I can articulate on a kind of tick box is that I am an other mixed Asian background. And now my mother is Turkish and my dad is from Tanzania. And a lot of my personal and lived experiences throughout my life have been influenced by my heritage. And so knowing that we had this kind of ambiguous group and community that we wanted to connect with was actually rather exciting, because it was also an opportunity for us when we actually go out and eventually meet people to ask them to kind of self-identify, which we could record, and that would better help us understand who and what communities live in the borough and how their experiences may differ from one another. So before thinking about designing our research discussion guides and kind of doing recruitment, we really wanted to kind of immerse ourselves, do some community immersion in Southwark and speak to people who live and work in the area. We wanted to discover local businesses, speak to people who live and work in the area. We wanted to kind of find our what cultural hubs were there and make connections with real people that could kind of inform certain questions for our in-depth interviews later on. And it can always be a bit tricky to immerse yourself somewhere as a researcher with your researcher's hat on and think about, what can I get out of this project? I need to make interactions and meet people and learn things. But actually the best way is to just have a day out and forget about the project, and interactions will happen naturally if you're just curious enough. And so, as I mentioned, a major part of the kind of cultural immersion from our side as DXW was really to understand who these other non-Black community members were. And so going into Southwark was not only an opportunity to learn about the built environment, but also to learn about who we would be designing with and for. And so actually, whilst doing this, us at DXW and Rooted found quite similar themes pop up from our cultural immersion trips, which was really refreshing. What we both found out early on is that a lot of residents of the borough did not have an awareness of the effects and the impact of air pollution. A few people that we initially interacted with kind of felt as if there was no need for them to worry about air pollution because they didn't have lung conditions. So a father and a parent of a young child who I was speaking to said, there isn't much we can do about it, so we just don't let it worry us. If we had issues with our lungs, then we would probably ask our doctor on what to do. Now, others felt really disconnected from the issue from kind of two sides. On the one hand, people felt kind of helpless about being able to do anything about it. And on the other hand, even if they were concerned about it, they wouldn't know where to go and find this information about air quality in the first place. And it was also really clear that people wanted short-term and long-term interventions. A lot of long-standing residents of the borough had kind of seen short-term interventions on other initiatives quickly lose momentum and kind of fizzle out. And so ensuring that short and long-term interventions were key, if anything, was to make an impact on the community. And so at this point, we decided that it would be really valuable and necessary to reframe the problem and the brief, which we kind of tend to do naturally in projects as we get to learn more about the problem space from the users. So for this project, it was particularly important for us to reframe the problem space and the brief to maintain an equity-centered approach. As I mentioned earlier on, that kind of behavior change model that was embedded in the initial brief just wouldn't sit well with our equity-centered approach, and Rooted really drove that forward. We were also really grateful to our two key contacts at Southwark, so someone from the air quality team and somebody from the public health team, who were really receptive and to reframing of the problem statement, which kind of made the project a whole lot easier and allowed us to produce a richer outcome. So we reframed our problem to this: how might we enable communities with awareness of the effects of air pollution in a way they can connect with and take immediate and long-term meaningful action? So as you'll notice, the behavior change element has been removed from this, and it has become much more centered around creating a foundation of awareness and around care that can allow for action to take place. And so with our new refined brief in mind, we felt a lot more confident about being able to answer this in a way that felt equitable and that felt right. So now was the time to carry out some more focused research through in-depth conversations. But in order to do that, we had to find ways to recruit, which wasn't as easy as you would imagine. Well, it wasn't as easy as it seemed, because as you would imagine, not many people were jumping out of their seat to kind of help the council with this piece of work. However, we kind of put together these research flyers with the aim of the research on it, how long it would take, the incentive, the date, but most importantly, we wanted to state the opportunity for participants to make a real impact. We didn't want it to seem as if we were just recruiting people to do interviews with and just understand a bit of information from them and say goodbye, but rather for them to be a continual part of the journey and in helping to create design solutions to help tackle this problem. So we reached out to a lot of community groups in and around Southwark who could pass on our digital flyers to members of their groups. And then we were able to set up our in-depth research interviews. And from our side at DXW, we did that completely remotely as the pandemic was still making it a bit difficult to meet indoors. And again, as you would imagine, a lot of the people who we spoke to had respiratory conditions. And so I think everyone was a lot more comfortable of doing them via Zoom or WhatsApp or any way we could, even a phone call. And so with our in-depth interviews, we were really conscious to build relationships over the extraction of information. We wanted to create a safe space for participants to open up and trust that time and information would be treated with respect. We wanted to let participants lead the conversation with our guidance. And we also realized that ethnographic questioning was equally as important as air quality questions. And now ethnographic questions kind of relate to the field of ethnography, which is all about understanding customs, habits, lived experiences, and more about people's lives and culture. So in this instance, ethnographic questioning was really helpful in understanding people's day-to-day lives. What do they do? Where do they go? Who do they interact with? And this was really important for us to understand and kind of see these patterns that exist in different communities and where interventions for solutions could potentially take place. And last but not least, we really wanted to ensure that participants knew that they had the ability to shape this project further than the interview. And we had some incredible sessions and so much lived experience shared with us. And I kind of wish I could share all or at least some of the insights, but it would take such a long time in the short time that I have. But these pictures on the right actually were from one of our participants who shared some of the joys he had walking around the borough doing photography during the pandemic. And so these interviews really provided us, like I said, with such a wealth of insight into people's lives that can naturally inform our opportunity areas and recommendations that I'll talk about a bit later on. And so we also conducted some pop-up research that we carried out in Southwark using these designed tools or designed probes to kind of provoke responses from the public towards air pollution and allow for ideas and solutions to be shared by them. It was also a great way to engage with lots of people in the borough who wouldn't have otherwise got involved in the research through formal recruitment. So we used tools for provocation, these kind of designed probes to interact with members of the public, generating ideas that would allow them, to generate ideas and expectations for a solution. And so, yeah, as I mentioned, it was a really great way to engage with lots of people, because a lot of the people who we spoke to we wouldn't have got hold of naturally through our kind of targeted research methods and through recruitment. And it was just a wonderful day out and to meet other people around the borough. And as you can see from my colleague Leanne, who was also working on this project, who's holding up all the kind of insights and the ideas and solutions that we had gathered from, and we were in Southwark Park at that time. So it was just a great way and a great method to actually widen our research and actually do some ideation, in person. And so we also used our own resources and reached out to our network of friends and acquaintances who lived in Southwark. We again used another kind of design probe to help us ideate remotely. And this was a postcard that we had designed that could, which essentially let people write to their past self. So you have to imagine the year is 2025, and they have a postcard to write to their past self today about a solution, a service, or a system, or anything, in fact, that's helped them mitigate their exposure to air pollution. And basically, we wanted to get in contact with as many people as possible in really fun and creative ways and do some blue sky thinking remotely. So what was the result of all this engagement? So across all of our interactions, we managed to interact in one form or another with over 90 different people around Southwark. Now, on the right-hand side, you can see a bit of a snapshot of who existed within those other communities, which was a really pleasant surprise and really quite amazing, even for being in London. Southwark was a real magnificent melting pot of culture. And again, all of these, backgrounds and cultures and ethnicities were all how people self-identified themselves. And it was just really wonderful to see that diversity. And so from all the insights we had gathered from interacting with people, led us to having this massive amount of opportunity areas. You can see here there are 11, and these were formulated from the wealth of insights that we had gathered from interacting with people. There were opportunity areas that were focused explicitly for the Black communities that Rooted had engaged with. So, for example, there was a need to join up and build on existing community energy, so that the opportunity was then, how might we build on the appetite for social change that exists within the Black communities so that people can make more systemic change for environmental justice? For other communities that we interacted with on our side as DXW, there were different insights that emerged, which created other opportunity spaces. So, for example, the need for public-facing awareness. So the opportunity area was, how might we create an intervention for public spaces so that information finds people more regularly? Now, within both Rooted and our insights, there were similar themes and alignment in our needs that emerged. And a big one was for the need for schools to educate both children and parents. And so the opportunity area was, how might we use schools as a way to educate parents and children about air pollution? Now, within each of these opportunity areas, there were solution ideas that came directly from the community and people who we interacted with through conversation and through co-design. And I believe we had around 55 or more solution ideas that we ended up mapping out. And the challenge at this point was really trying to sense make from all of these opportunity spaces and ideas about what to focus on next, and more importantly, what Southwark should focus on. And so one of the ways that we tried to synthesize and structure these ideas and opportunity areas was thinking about a kind of service ecosystem. So it was really clear, and this would have occurred naturally because of the equity-centered approach that we took, that there wasn't going to be a one-size-fits-all solution. So we used this ecosystem model to set these ideas out. So all of those little different colored dots represent different ideas. And we broke down the model into 3 sections. So the first was building trust and relationships through to raising awareness, and then ending on enabling action. And this could be thought of as actually the journey that any resident of Southwark would need to go through in order to take action to protect themselves from bad air quality. And I think that we realized that the different individuals and different communities were actually coming in from a very different starting place. So some may have had a very low trust and weak relationship with the council. So acknowledging that had to be addressed and overcome would be really helpful for Southwark in moving forward with some of these ideas and opportunity spaces. And actually having this all, having all of these on one page really helped us to just get the ideas out into the open, into a space, and allow it to be more digestible, and to kind of create it into this process of things that need to be created. So this was a really, really helpful exercise that we had done. We then did further prioritization around thinking about this from Southwark's perspective. So which opportunity would be best placed to lead on, and which opportunities would they be better in playing a kind of supporting role on, even in either enabling or funding. And so this was really helpful, or a helpful way rather, in helping Southwark know where to kind of start. We also wanted to map these opportunities in a way that would give an idea about how much something might cost to implement and how long it might take to implement. So we have opportunities that are really quick and cheaper to implement on the bottom left, and opportunities with a higher cost that would take longer to implement on the top right. And I'll mention just a couple from this matrix, which we actually know that Southwark are already taking action on. So the public-facing health and awareness campaign, particularly is being focused on asthma, actually, is something that Southwark have got the ball rolling on, that not only requires insights from this discovery to help inform those campaigns, but of course, would also require the same people and communities that we spoke to in this discovery to co-design and co-develop the ideas for this campaign work, which is really exciting. And on the top far right corner, we have a joint opportunity space that arose, which was around enabling local air quality data to be provided in public spaces. Now, oh, sorry, that wasn't a joint opportunity area. So that was, sorry, an area for a key area for something to enable and fund. And yes, so that was about, enabling a kind of air quality data to be provided in public spaces. And that was one of the kind of key findings that people needed. That was like a really big key finding, sorry, that people needed this information through lots of different channels. So as an individual app is one thing, but having this information and data in a public space creates a community response. So rather than putting the onus on the individual, that this information actually reaches out and finds people as a community. And so this was a really key area that we were really happy, in that's moving forward. And Southwark have actually submitted an application for some DEFRA funding with our assistance. And this can hopefully help share and broadcast some of this air quality information and data in places such as public transport displays, which again would be hugely, hugely exciting. And so, what did we learn about a equity-centered design approach at DXW, and something that we thought would be really lovely to share with you all? Well, trusting in the process takes time. So embracing the uncertainty and unexpected may conflict actually with a kind of agile process. Having the time to reflect and analyze emotionally driven research can take time, and decompression for researchers and people, or anyone who's involved in the project, is absolutely critical so that we don't burn out. So essentially, time is really golden. And sometimes when we're going or working on projects in an agile way, we can kind of forget that some very complex social challenges just can't be solved in short sprints over a short period of time. It requires a lot of time and nurture to build relationships. It requires time to fully understand the root of the problem. It also takes time to analyze insights and go back to the community to kind of build on these insights and ideas that have emerged so that they can mature to a place collaboratively that can enable them to really launch properly at a next stage. And so taking time and taking a more design-led, fluid approach is absolutely essential. Giving more than we take, and this was a huge lesson learned. So when people are giving up more than just their time, they're sharing their lived experience, they're sharing, some of the trauma that's happened to them, it is really important to ensure that we not only incentivize fairly, but keep giving them ongoing support. And what I mean by that is that we want to leave communities that we interact with the autonomy to be able to follow up with the research that they've been involved with. So closing the gap between the people that we've spoken to and whoever's funding this project and continuing it forward. And in this case, that's Southwark. So like I mentioned throughout the presentation, keeping the power in the people's hands and making them the decision maker is absolutely a must, so that they can become the leaders and the designers, and we become really the facilitators of the process. And lastly, design is political. And again, this was another huge lesson that we learned. It's really easy to forget about the relationship between design and empowerment. Being aware of the biases in the room is absolutely key. And design really has the ability to kind of create this paradigm shift in power structures. And it's our jobs as facilitators of good design to be conscious of this. Oftentimes, we're facilitating projects where we are not the end user of the outcome or the output of the project. And so making a decision that could impact someone's life should not be an option for us. It can be very difficult for us to kind of see past our own biases about how we should approach a project. But really, the only true owners of the project should be the people whom it's for. So that's the end of our presentation, and thank you ever so much for listening. It's been an absolute pleasure to share this work that us and Rooted by Design have undertook with Southwark, and we welcome any questions that you may have, so please feel free to write them in the comments section. Thank you ever so much.